Okay, we are rolling and testing and testing. Walked up to a man on the street the other day and I said, "How far to the station?" He said, 1 mile. I said, 1 mile? He said, 1 mile, roughly speaking. Don't know why I bother. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bad Country. Languages change and evolve in time. You ever wonder why English spelling is so weird? It's because of the dictionary. The English dictionary standardized English spelling. It kept it the same, but the way that we speak has changed and evolved. The first comprehensive English dictionary was published in 1755 by Dr. Samuel Johnson, who is this absolutely fascinatingly strange guy. He had every physical and mental illness it's possible to have, but he was also a genius. And his dictionary was so good that it standardized the spelling of English orthography, essentially right up until today. But the language that he was codifying and standardizing when he wrote that dictionary was already old by the time he wrote it down. He was having to make decisions about what words would continue to have a life in which variations of words would be dropped. In 1754, there were about 6 different recorded pronunciations of the word church, for example. You might have kirk, or kirch, or kirk. Each different region of England and Scotland and Wales had their own way of pronouncing that particular word, and he had to select the one that he thought was most representative. And at that time, the word through, Through, was pronounced something more like throch, and the bough of a tree, bough B-O-U-G-H, was like bauch, and so on. English pronunciation has continued to evolve at a rapid rate, but our spelling is still locked to the middle of the 18th century. Why am I talking about dictionaries? Well, a lot of time has passed since AA appeared and the Big Book was published. A lot of the language inside if you're unfamiliar, the Big Book is like the core text of 12-step programs, particularly AA. A lot of the language inside that book is so frankly outdated that it keeps people away, especially kind of progressive types. I live in Europe, and the outdated nature of the language in the Big Book it sometimes keeps people outside the rooms. It prevents people from coming in, because to a European ear, that language sounds very outdated from a bygone era, which essentially it is. It's nearly 100 years old now. Even the word alcoholic itself is no longer fashionable. Not to say it was ever fashionable, but you know what I mean. Health professionals are now encouraging people to use alcohol use disorder. I tend to think that people with alcohol use disorder anonymous is a little bit clunky. A few too many syllables in there. I don't think it's going to catch on. Hey Dave, you going to Powder tonight? You going to a Powder meeting, Dave? Powder? Oh shit, I actually quite like that. Trademark. But there's stuff in there that might feel old-fashioned or is written in a slightly outdated tone, but still has real value day to day. There's information in the Big Book that, while it's couched in language that our more sensitive society at the moment might find uncomfortable, there is still really good stuff in there. It contains truth. And sometimes we have to look past the language itself. What can I hear buzzing? Is there a moth in here, for fuck's sake? Sounds like it's big. A little like English spelling and the dictionary, our language has moved on since the Big Book was written, and we began having serious conversations about alcohol use disorder and alcohol abuse. And language that used to be completely appropriate no longer is. But there's a few things I'd like to preserve, despite the growing sensitivities around them. My approach to all literature, in fact all critical material, is to chew the meat and spit out the bones. It's a good way to live. And today I want to talk about dry drunk syndrome, and how even knowing about its existence might help you to prevent a relapse. So what is dry drunk syndrome? Well, I'll give a couple of definitions and also some examples, because I find that the examples from my own life are quite useful, quite instructive. Dry drunk syndrome is not a medically acknowledged condition. It's more like an informal diagnosis, something that roughly describes a large group of symptoms. Like a lot of what we pick up in 12-step programs, it's not necessarily scientific, but that doesn't make it without value. It's not necessarily worthless just because it's not the product of a scientific procedure, it's not empirically tested. Dry drunk syndrome is a condition in which an alcoholic has managed to quit the actual alcohol, but continues to exhibit the emotional and psychological behaviours associated with active alcoholism. You've finished with the alcohol, but the alcohol hasn't finished with you, basically. In other words, you're still an active alcoholic, you're just not actively drinking alcohol. You're still displaying all of the behaviour that you did when you were drinking, you're just not drinking. Everything that made you selfish and difficult to be around, that's all still there, but you are technically sober. In fact, in recovery communities beyond alcohol, you might also hear the term unsober, feeling unsober, which means that you are sober, you haven't taken your addictive substance of choice, but your mindset is not sober. You're not in a sober headspace, for lack of a better term. And it's a very dangerous place to be, because the only component missing from this state is the drink itself. And without intervention, there's only a small step between dry drunk syndrome to, well, drunk syndrome, I guess. Hey, I'll tell you what, if we're looking for a word to replace alcoholic, I think drunk syndrome is a pretty good contender. I'm not an alcoholic, I'm suffering from drunk syndrome. So what causes dry drunk syndrome? What's behind dry drunk syndrome? Well, in short, and not to be too facile about this, but whatever was causing your alcohol use disorder in the first place is probably causing your dry drunk syndrome too. The way it was explained to me was that dry drunk syndrome is largely a product of not doing the work, not working on your recovery, not doing the daily grind work of recovery. Complacency, that is, having too much confidence in your sobriety and taking it for granted that you've got your addiction beaten. Then if you're doing that, you're just leaving the door slightly ajar for a relapse. Pride cometh before a fall, right? And speaking openly, that is exactly what has caused the majority of my major relapses. It's that complacency, that not doing the work. It's largely what this channel is about. This is part of me doing the work. I'd been sober for about 3 years the first time I had a major relapse. And that relapse was because I wasn't actively working on my sobriety anymore. I'd let it slide. I wasn't doing anything. I thought I had it dialed in. I thought I had everything figured out, and then wham, like a freight train full of vodka, I was straight back in the middle of deep addiction, just overnight. So to put it bluntly, if you're not working towards your sobriety all the time, you're a dry drunk. And if you're a dry drunk, a relapse is just waiting to happen. But all of that's micro level stuff, that's details. Because there's a macro issue above it all, the real cause of dry drunk syndrome. And it's this, the overarching cause. Dry drunk syndrome occurs when you have not resolved the issues that led to your alcohol abuse in the first place. It's all well and good putting down the bottle and thinking that you've quit. If you haven't dealt with the underlying issues, then a relapse is just waiting to jump out on you. And it'll happen when you're not expecting it. A lot of us, all of us, have an alcohol use disorder because of emotional or psychological issues. I honestly don't think there are any exceptions to that. Even if you don't know what your emotional issues or your psychological issues are, you are still subjected to them. Trauma, depression, anxiety, any number of mental health issues or neurodivergence, whatever it is, if you haven't been working towards addressing all of that really difficult stuff, you're a candidate for dry drunk syndrome, and therefore a candidate, I'm afraid to say, for relapse. You have to do the homework. So how do you spot when you might be a dry drunk or experiencing dry drunk syndrome? Well, again, to be candid, I'm making this video right now because I think I have it myself right now. Like just recently I've had little pangs of nostalgia for drinking, which is not good. And I've just learned over time, over a number of relapses, to spot my patterns of behavior that are indicative of an incoming relapse. I think I'm at risk right now. I feel there are some patterns of my behavior that lead me to suspect I am currently a dry drunk. I've spotted my own behavior, but more than that, my girlfriend has spotted it. My parents too. My mum, my poor, long-suffering mother. She can spot if I'm wavering just from how I say, "How are you?" on Facebook Messenger. That's how well attuned the people around me are. They spot it before I do. Yes, I still use Facebook Messenger to speak to my mum. Look, I never said I was cool, okay? The point is, it's often easier for people around you to identify your addictive behavior than it is for you to spot it yourself. So listen when people tell you that they think that you might be unsober, however you interpret that, and take that comment with humility. Take it away with you, because they're more likely to know than you are. That's the case with me. I need other people to tell me. To give you a bit of a leg up, a bit of a head start in spotting your own dry, drunk behavior patterns, I'll share with you my own, or 5 of them anyway. And I'm going to share them as best I can with some real examples so that you can see what these things are like in practice. And then hopefully you might be able to spot them in yourself if you share them. Number 1, isolating myself. This is probably the biggest. It's also usually quite a slow process, so it can be quite hard to spot. I like my own company at the best of times, as well as the worst of times. I like being alone. I protect my own space, even when I'm healthy and relatively stable as I could be. But there's a point at which I stray from wanting to preserve my own personal space to actively shutting people out. When I'm preserving my own personal space, I think in general that's probably quite safe, maybe even healthy in some regards. When you're actively shutting people out and keeping people at a distance, that's less healthy. And it starts small. It starts in small ways. I get anxious about my mail, physical, like post mail. I won't open my own mail for days. And that's the first little warning sign. I don't want to open it, so I just don't. The same with emails. I get a pang of anxiety every time I hear my email notification go ping. And that's part of isolating myself, is wanting to shut other people out, limit the channels of communication. And eventually I start even picking fights with people, my girlfriend or my loved ones, friends, family, colleagues, in an effort to kind of push them away, to give me the space that I want, to isolate myself in. And I really push people away so that I can dwell on my misfortunes and feel sorry for myself. And that is exactly what I do when I'm actively drinking. So that's relapse territory for me. Number 2, lying. I'm honest in general, I think, but in dry drunk states, I start lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. It's not always deceptive, but it's not honest either. This happened recently. I run a small marketing agency. That's my business. And for a while, a relationship with one of my clients had been deteriorating. And basically, I'd helped launch the business. And as soon as it launched, it was underperforming. And I felt very bad and under a lot of pressure and stress. I felt very guilty about it. But instead of reaching into my network of professionals for support and colleagues and stuff, I just kind of told everyone everything was fine and that there wasn't a problem. And that might not sound much, but it's in the little behaviors, I think, that we find signs of a larger problem. Okay, so when I am saying everything is fine, there is no problem, that's almost exactly like the way I might say, leave me alone, I don't have a problem. And that's alcoholic talk, isn't it? You see the parallels there. As above, so below. 3, the third of the 5, emotional volatility. I'm not a rage monster. In fact, I rarely even get particularly angry. I think grumpy is a better word to describe me. And that's true, like, even when I'm fine. When I'm circling kind of the sobriety drain slightly, as I have been recently, it's not grumpiness, it's like outright irritability, spikiness. I'm more irritable and I'm more acerbic and I'm more spiteful than I usually am. And I'm usually a little bit of all of those most of the time, so it can be hard to tell. But it manifests in me being very direct, very blunt with my colleagues and loved ones. Just being kind of spiky and unapproachable and treating every little request like it's a major burden, instead of being open and willing, which is what I prefer to be most of the time. I think that response, that reaction of making people feel bad for asking me for things, I think that's designed to make people feel bad because I feel bad. It's really petty. I find myself lashing out and making a big deal out of other people's flaws and mistakes, and it's just, God, I think I might just be a shitty person. I think that's it. Okay, number 4. Impulsiveness. Impulsivity / just buying shit that I don't need. It sounds stupid, just buying stuff I don't need. It shouldn't be like a major warning sign, but anytime that I'm itching to buy a new vintage camera or a new lens or something, which I clearly don't need, it's quite often a sign that something is off balance within me. Listen to this shutter. Oh, don't make them like they used to. And that's not just me. I think that impulsivity is a common characteristic of dry drunk syndrome. A lot of people report impulsivity. For me, I buy expensive stuff that I don't really need. For other people, travel is a big one. For other people, I don't know, it could be sex, reckless casual sex, or any other way to kind of scratch that addiction itch. Dry drunk syndrome, however you interpret that very unscientific label, it can have the same kind of disregard for consequences as active addiction. It can drive you to do things you might regret. So look out for it. If you suddenly have the urge to dump all of your savings into crypto or something, just check in with yourself, make sure what you're doing is driven by reason and rationality rather than the impulsiveness of an addiction cycle, and not part of a larger network of underlying influences. And also, just don't put all your money in crypto. Okay, number 5, avoiding responsibility and deflecting. This is another big one for me. When I'm dry drunk or feeling unsober, in inverted commas, it can lead me to refuse to take any responsibility for being that way. Even if people are telling me that I am perhaps not in balance, the fact that I am going through that will lead me to blame external factors for it, rather than taking responsibility for it. Instead, I will deflect my behavior onto everyone and everything else around me. Unfortunately, because of this accent and because I know my way around a sentence, I can be quite persuasive at convincing everybody that it really is their fault. It's quite quite manipulative. I can be quite persuasive, and that's not me bragging. In fact, my girlfriend asked me to include this bit that I'm saying now, specifically because I have the ability to cause a problem, then be angry at people for calling me out for causing the problem, and then convincing them that it was their fault to begin with. It's like a very sophisticated gaslighting technique, and I don't like it about me. If you catch yourself blaming everyone around you for problems that are essentially your fault, then you might need to take a look in the mirror at some point and just check yourself before you wreck yourself. Okay, so just a relatively short one today, and we'll talk potentially about how to treat this another time. This isn't the place to do it, and I'm certainly not an expert in that. In fact, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm the patient. Right now, I am in it, rather than treating it. Like I said, I made this video because I'm doing some of these things right now, and by calling attention to it, hopefully I can take responsibility for it and nip it in the bud, so it doesn't become a problem. You also need to treat the idea of everything I just said, all of the thing about dry drunk syndrome, just treat it with a little bit of caution. As I said, it's not scientific, and as I spent several minutes at the start of this video, the language behind it it's not very modern. But I do want to protect the phrase dry drunk syndrome, and I want to protect the idea. I think it's important because it is useful. It is useful for simplifying and condensing a nuanced psychological concept into terms we can all understand, right? There's value in that because not everyone in recovery has a doctorate in neuroscience. I think terms like dry drunk syndrome, we can process it easily. We don't need to go and study and have an intimate knowledge of neuropsychology in order to comprehend what dry drunk syndrome is, even if it is not a particularly scientific term. And I think that's my bit for tonight. I'm running out of coffee, so let's wrap it up. If you like the thoughts that come out of my big rubbery face, please do subscribe and like. And I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this subject in the comments. I do reply to everything, so I would like to know, honestly, whether I'm way off track with this stuff, as I often am. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I like to be proven wrong. So, thank you for watching, and as always, good luck out there.